Manna from heaven. Have you ever heard that phrase uttered before? Manna from heaven. It's always a good phrase, isn't it? It's always, oh, that was something that hit the spot. It was like manna from heaven. Oh, that was something that was so needed. It was like manna from heaven. Or that was so delicious. It was like manna from heaven. I heard about a young woman who is, actually she's pretty much obsessed with anything pumpkin spiced. Have you heard of this? Pumpkin spice? Used to be just the thing that Grandma shook just a little bit of it into a pie at Thanksgiving. And now it's in literally everything you eat. How many of you love this time of year because you love that pumpkin spice? How many of you love it? Okay. How many of you think it's just gone entirely too far? Yeah. But apparently that vote doesn't count because it has gone entirely too far. And I think there are just pumpkin spice teams at product departments now. And that's, well, can we put it on that? I don't know. Let's try. Let's try and see what happens. So anyway, there was this lady, and her mid-20s, and she's in an office, and she's got coworkers that challenged her to eat nothing but pumpkin spiced stuff for 2 days. She's like, not a problem. They're like, no, not just have a latte every day or every meal, but you've got to, if it's not already flavored with it, you have to sprinkle pumpkin spice on it. So she made for her first meal pancakes. Pumpkin spice was delicious. Had a latte to rinse it down. That was fine. Went through and had pumpkin spice yogurt. She didn't care for that. Went through and had some other products and things, and hadn't really thought about it until she got to her dinner that night, which was salmon and broccoli. The salmon, she said, was surprisingly good, kind of like a maple, kind of when you do a maple salmon glaze. It was actually kind of tasty. The broccoli had no redeeming qualities whatsoever when pumpkin spice was put on it. And she went through this, and some of the things she really liked and other things she wasn't so sure about. And when she got to the end, she says, I still love pumpkin spice, but I think I need a break. I think I'm going to take a little bit of a break. So what's, your favorite food? What's the thing that you crave, the most often? A good burger? Maybe you're a healthier person than me. It's maybe a nice salad. Or a guilty pleasure like a Snickers bar or some Oreo cookies. And do you measure your Oreo by the number or by the row? That's the question, because, sweetie, how many did you have? I only had one, dear. One row. What if you could have your favorite every day? I think on the surface we'd all be very excited until it sunk in that what if we had to have it every day? Not we got to, we had to. Then all of a sudden that thing that's very special because of its infrequency in our life would become kind of maybe not so enjoyable. That was the way it was with manna in the wilderness for the Israelites. It was blessed. It was a wonderful thing that God had done for them. But their time in the wilderness with quail and manna was a 40-year period. Now, I've known folks that have the same lunch. My dad is a creature of habit, and for I don't know how many years, glass of water, apple, and then the only thing he did rotate would be the lunch meat. It'd be olive loaf some weeks and bologna some weeks and stuff. In the teacher's lounge, he'd always have the same little brown bag. He could handle that every day, same thing. But 40 years, every meal, every day's menu the same? I don't know. The manna itself, you got to kind of combine the accounts in Numbers and Exodus to find out what this stuff really, really was. It was a fine flake-like thing, like the frost in the ground that came with the dew of the morning, and it had to be collected early before it melted in the sunshine. It was like coriander seed and appeared in small clusters that were ground and pounded into cakes that were baked that taste like bread that had fresh oil. So that's kind of interesting. And if you read on in Exodus, it was actually something that they mandated that they capture and put into a jar, like a scorpion. No, just kidding. They put into a jar, and they kept it in the Ark of the Covenant next to the Ten Commandments. Now, of course, in this part of the story, we're not quite there yet because Sinai and stuff, and then the wandering happens after. So we're right in that time where this Ark of the Covenant is being constructed. And then as it's constructed, the tablets are placed in there, as is a jar with this substance. Now, I don't know if you don't make it into bread, if it doesn't spoil as fast or what, but they were supposed to do that. Why? Because for generations to come, they could tell of God's faithfulness. Oh, remember when we were hungry in the desert, in the wilderness? Yeah, here it is. Look, as a reminder that God fed us when we were hungry. Another thing that I saw this week, I really wanted to share with you, but it was far too long to show during church. But it was a guy that signed up for a food challenge. But what he wanted to do was to eat the same food that Syrian refugees eat in the refugee camps. And so he signed up online, and the company shipped him this package of a week's worth of refugee food. The first thing that one of his coworkers said was like, "This is really light. This is a whole week's of food." He's like, "Yeah, okay." He opens it up, and he plans out his meals, and he's got everything put together to figure out. And he said the one thing he noticed first was there was no salt and pepper. So the blandest of the blandest of the blandest of food that you have to choke down without salt and pepper. I think he cheated and used salt and pepper from his own cabinet. But so he goes through, and the first day he's like, "Hey, today's the first day. I'm going to eat like refugee." And they show, the different things that he has to eat, and it's almost all starches and carbs. There's no fresh fruits and vegetables. There's no good protein. There's some beans, but there's so few of them that it's really not going to register. By the second day, it's harder for him to get up for his alarm. By the third day, even harder. He starts having headaches, fatigue, sleeping at work, all that kind of stuff. And he did that so that he put it on a video so that he could educate others who didn't go through it. And it's something you can sign up and do online if you wanted to do that. But it's really powerful to me because I think when we think about refugees and we think about people in resettlement camps or refugee camps where they will be like Israelites, not wandering but kind of stuck. They're not home but they're not away. They're taken care of but yet they're not. It's like most of us would say, well, that's great that they're being fed. They should be thankful for that. But is it really a blessing if you're being fed 3 meals a day and yet you're still hungry? Isn't that kind of cruel? Here's this food, and you're still going to be hungry because there's just not enough of the right stuff. Now, I will give a caveat that there are refugee agencies that do try to get fresh fruits and vegetables and stuff in. So this is not a blanket statement that this happens to every single person. But what it does is when we look at someone else and we think we understand their story and we start making our own assumptions, we find that we might be tiptoeing on a line that we're not quite in the truth. That their experience isn't what we would assume it would be or should be. Oh, are they thankful for what they have? You better believe it. You better believe it. But what that really spoke to me about was it's already horrendous in those camps. And now the fact that a lot of them, even with food in their stomachs, still feel hungry. It's a reminder for us that being people and followers of Jesus are people that share and people that help. And if we're generous and we're raising money and doing things like that, we're helping people to eat. And that's the other thing that I'm on the board for God's Bounty, and we served food this last week at Midwest Food Bank. And I mean, seeing these people from all different denominations and charitable groups and service clubs or whatever, helping to stock that place, it was amazing. And we got to meet some really, really neat people. And all the fresh fruits and stuff and the things that God's Bounty does to help people have nutritious meals, that is so important that as we are generous, that we do so in ways that really does help someone's life out. Tremendous idea. And I've said this before, that when we're charitable, when we're giving, when we're generous, we should give in a way as though we were giving to ourselves or someone we really knew and loved. I mean, think about it. If you've got a dear friend who's in troubled times, what kind of food do you give to them? And is it the same food that you would bring for a canned food driver collection? That's the kind of generosity we should have, is that same kind of attitude of wanting to help. But what it all comes down to is the fact that God provides everything. God provides everything. And while we don't have to eat quail and dew cakes, that's the other thing, is why did they not talk so much? Why didn't they, embalm a quail and put it in there too? Because God provided the quail. Well, they'd seen quail before. They knew how to hunt quail. They knew how to get that, as part of their diet. Once they got into an area that wasn't quite as desolate, more wilderness than desert, they just knew, they thanked God for the quail. But the manna, to have something that literally fell from the heavens and was magically almost is just appearing in the mornings, that was something to celebrate. So, we don't have to eat quail and those cakes made out of the stuff that fell from the sky for 40 years. But we all have things about our lives that we don't like. Every one of us has something in our lives that we don't like. What are the blessings that we take for granted? See, the Israelites would eventually complain nonstop about the manna and how they were so tired of eating it, and they said that they were better off as slaves in Egypt. Interesting historical fact, in Egypt, they would pay people in beer. Yeah, honey mead, brewed honey mead, is how the Egyptians would make sure that their slaves had enough energy to build the pyramids. So that was something that they would put together. Don't know if the Israelites received that or not, but that was a fact that's the way that Egypt would treat many of its slaves. But I just can't wrap my mind around this whole thing that they cried out to the Lord, deliver us, and the Lord delivered them, saved them. I heard the cries of my people, he tells Moses. Then what happens? They complain. I've heard the complaints of my people. Because it wasn't just enough to be delivered. Can you imagine that? I was better off in slavery. This food is horrible. In his autobiography, Breaking Barriers, syndicated columnist Carl Rowan tells about a teacher who greatly influenced his life. He says, Miss Thompson reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a piece of paper containing a quote attributed to Chicago architect Daniel Burnham. I listened intently as she read, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work. Remember that our sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters are going to do things that would stagger us." And more than 30 years later, he said, I gave a speech in which I said Frances Thompson had given me a desperately needed belief in myself. And a newspaper printed the story and someone mailed the clipping to my beloved teacher. She wrote me, "You have no idea what that newspaper story meant to me. For years I endured my brother's arguments that I had wasted my life, that I should have married and had a family. And when I read that you gave me credit for helping to launch a marvelous career, I put the clipping in front of my brother, and after he'd read it, I said, 'You see, I didn't really waste my life, did I?'" First off, I think the moral to the story is if you've got a teacher that meant something to you, by golly, will you let them know directly, quickly? Don't let them just sit there and wonder if they've made a difference, because anyone who is in a position like many of our teachers have been, they wonder if they made a difference. So if a teacher made a difference in your life, drop them a line, an email, a Facebook message, something. Put a card in the mail and just say, "Hey, just thanks for being you." But Frances Thompson, that teacher that made all the difference in the world, had the manna of a teaching career each day and saw it as an opportunity to inspire young minds. To her brother, it was a wasted blessing because of the other things in her life that he thought she should have. You see, when you see the manna in your life, you move beyond normal or should have or even like everyone else. You move into a life lived of being blessed when you recognize the manna as a gift from God. And for those Israelites, because of the manna, they were alive. Because of the manna, they could feed their families. Because of the manna, they didn't have to worry about what to eat since God provided daily. And because of the manna, they knew that God provided. They knew that God lived up to God's promises. What is the manna in your life? What is provided that you take for granted or really don't care for? I have no idea what that is for you. It could be a job. It could be a relationship. It could be anything, really. Now remember that God provides the best available based on our choices and the choices of those in our midst who've had an impact on us. It's not like we could be mad that we didn't get the executive accounting position when we never took a math class in our life. That's kind of unrealistic. And sometimes these things in our life, they're fair, and sometimes they're unfair. But God will still provide. Irma Bombeck wrote that an estimated, and this was in the mid-90s, so it was probably more, a lot more, wrote that an estimated 1.5 million people are living today after bouts with breast cancer. She said, every time I forget to feel grateful to be among them, I hear the voice of an 8-year-old named Christina who had cancer of the nervous system. And when asked what she wanted for her birthday, she thought long and hard and finally said, I don't know. I have 2 sticker books and a Cabbage Patch doll. I have everything. She was thankful. Even in the midst of her suffering, she was thankful. And Irma closed that thought with, the kid is right. When we aren't thankful, but instead bitter about what we don't have, we miss the blessing. Now, we might still use the blessing. We might still be engaged with the blessing. We might still practice the blessing. But we do so only on a surface level, and we miss its power. We might still use it, but we miss the power that is inside every blessing from God that nurtures our soul and helps us to have peace. Manna is more than bread. It is the symbol. It is the very reminder that each day, each morning, new mercies and blessings are given to you if you will pay attention. It might be the same old job. It might be the same old whatever. But when you approach it with thankfulness, you might just be surprised. The level of blessing you begin to experience in your life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.